Noah Schmeiser, welcome to Strategy Simplified. Excited to have you on today. How is your Wednesday going?
It's going pretty well. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me on, and I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, excited to have you for what I hear is your first podcast conversation. But can you just go ahead and kick us off? Tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're up to now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a very recent graduate of the University of Virginia. I graduated a couple months ago. I did commerce, so finance and management at Virginia. Did some quantitative finance as well. Before that, I'm from Milford, Connecticut, which is where I am right now. I'm taking this podcast from home, and yeah, I'll be going into consulting this fall.
Amazing. Well, congrats on both graduating. That's a big accomplishment in itself, but also on the consulting gig, which I'm excited to dig into more throughout the course of today's conversation. So let's just go there right away. You're starting at MBB this fall. Can you kind of go back to the beginning and give us a high-level overview of that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So to start the story off, I'd probably go back to the beginning of college. And I actually came into college and came into Virginia on a very different path. And I was very interested in being in the military, being a military pilot. That had been a dream and a goal of mine since I was a kid. And coming into college, I was in ROTC. I thought that would be a great path. And that was really my 5, 10, 15-year plan. Because, when you're in that, being a pilot, it's a 10-year service commitment after you graduate. So that was kind of where I was going, where I was headed. And then at the end of my sophomore year, I injured my back. And the whole process with that kind of took that military option off of the table, just from, a waiver and technical perspective. And so I was sitting there at the kind of summer before my junior year, end of sophomore year, really trying to decide what I wanted to do after college and where I saw myself going for the next, 5, 10, 15 years. And consulting was an option, and it was an attractive option. I liked the idea of traveling and, having a big impact early, being exposed to multiple fields. But it was really an option because I knew a lot of people that were applying for, studying finance and management and consulting, banking. Those are kind of the two big paths that most people go down. So I applied pretty extensively to a variety of places, sent in a bunch of applications, but didn't really have a great sense of what I was doing, why I was interested in the industry, and didn't really get very far with internship recruiting at all. And so then the year afterward, this past year, going into my senior year, I focused up and decided that, consulting as opposed to banking or finance was a path that I really wanted to go down, and did a lot to understand the industry, a lot to prepare, and ended up with an offer.
Amazing. Okay, though that's quite the roller coaster there for you. I'm sure having this kind of track, like, what you're doing, military, that's going for you, but then kind of have that taken away from you in a sense. And, a couple years later, you find yourself about to start consulting. So, that's an achievement in itself, just kind of, I'm sure, rebounding from that. But, you mentioned the first go around going for consulting internships. You didn't manage to secure a consulting offer, but you did the next year. High level, what was the difference? What was the change there that ultimately led you to, being able to overcome the hurdle this past year?
Yeah, well, David, it's a good question. And I think, what it really comes down to is understanding the process. The first time I went through, I really didn't understand how recruiting worked. I didn't really even understand how, not just consulting recruiting, but recruiting for business jobs in general. And I think it's really difficult to succeed in a process that you don't fully understand. I mean, we see that, with this kind of stuff, but really in anything, if you don't understand what you're doing, it's hard to do it well. And I think that was the biggest piece that changed for me, is that I spent much of my junior year, recruiting and continuing to recruit for internships, sure, but also really trying to get a sense of what it was I wanted to do. And then, I decided, okay, well, I want to do consulting. What exactly does it take to get there? How can I succeed in each phase of this recruiting journey? The other thing I'd like to say is I think that consulting is very much a 2-year recruiting pipeline. I know a lot of firms don't consider it a negative at all if you apply for an internship and don't get a slot. In fact, they've seen your name before, maybe they consider it a positive. And I'd contrast that with an industry like banking or more financial roles where if you don't have an internship coming in, it's really hard to get a full-time offer. I think consulting is much more of a 2-year process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that should, give some hope to people who were in your shoes, where maybe they weren't able to land the internship. And we hear these stories all the time, right? You try the first time, whether you're in your undergrad program or even in an MBA, it's the same. Like, it's a 2-year process, and rather than letting that kind of defeat you, you kind of decide to take it a little more seriously, understand it, and go for it. So, Noah, for you mentioned you had to really understand how consulting recruiting works. How would you break that down, like, to someone who's maybe coming in new, or you're speaking to Noah back then who wasn't quite sure what he was doing? Like, how would you kind of break down what the heck the consulting recruiting process is?
Well, I can't necessarily speak for the process everywhere, but I can speak to the process on my end and what it looked like for me. I'd say it really breaks down into two kind of big parts, and not to sound overly structured or case interview-esque here, but to kind of break it down, I would say it's all about getting the interview and then doing well in the interview. And getting the interview is your application, it's networking, and then doing well in the interview. You have the case interviews. Maybe some firms have personal interviews as well. And for me, much of the focus there was on the case interview. But kind of going back to that first step, getting the interview, networking is a piece of it. Having your resume tailored is a piece of it. Writing the an appropriate cover letter is a piece of it. I think those are all pieces of it. Choosing where you want to apply, where you want to firm, and then location as well. One thing that I struggled with during that part of the process was my resume. Tailoring my resume for consulting as opposed to just kind of a generic resume was difficult, because one thing I was told going through the process before I was applying is that you really want to have data, you really want to have numbers, percentages, say, okay, well, I did this position and drove this change, which resulted in this percentage and this impact. And it can be really hard to put things in college or, summer jobs you have, at 19 years old in that kind of framework. So that was a struggle. And I still don't know, how well I necessarily did that, but that was something I definitely took some time working through. And then on the interview side, preparing for the case interviews takes time. It's a grind, but it's something that I found that once I got the hang of it a little bit, I really enjoyed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I love how you broke that down. That's a great structure to look at the process through. One, you got to get the interview. Two, you got to pass the interview, and not just one interview, but multiple interviews, multiple rounds. So it's not just something you can kind of show up and wing. So let's dive into a few of these pieces. I know folks love the kind of tactical tips and experiences here. So let's start with networking. What did that look like for you? Did you reach out to 5 people or 50 people? Like, how many conversations did you have? Like, what tangibly did that look like?
Well, to be honest, Japheth, I can't remember exactly how many people I talked to. It was a good amount. And I mean, for me, it really looked like just reaching out to people that I knew, people that I found on LinkedIn. I got sort of a LinkedIn premium trial and kind of cast my net as broadly as I could. I was considering really every firm, that you would have heard of, and many that I hadn't heard of before I started the process. And so I really just tried to cast my net as broadly as I could, starting with the firms where maybe I knew people, I had friends from school or friends from home, and then really just working out from there. I would say, as far as a number, I definitely talked to dozens of people. How many specifically, I couldn't really tell you.
Yeah. And for people who are kind of turned off or scared from the word networking, because it it has a negative connotation. What's for you? Could you kind of define what the purpose is of networking? What was your purpose for networking, and how did that tie into like the eventual like offer?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people are scared of the word networking, kind of starting with where you started there, because it comes across as very fake, and it feels like, leveraging people. That's kind of inherent in that word, working your network. But I certainly something that I've been scared of at times, and coming into the whole business recruiting pipeline, I really had no idea about that part of it. I think for me, networking is about it. It really, at its best, is a two-way street where, people at different firms are learning about you, and you're getting your name out there, and maybe you're looking at a firm that your school doesn't really recruit with too heavily or something. It's a way for you to kind of get your name out there and have people know who you are, but it's also a way for you to learn about that firm and understand if it would be a potential fit for you. Maybe there's a firm that is super prestigious and really well regarded, but you reach out and you speak with some analysts there, or some partners there, and get a better sense of what it is exactly they do. And you say, okay, well, that industry isn't something that, as prestigious as it is, that isn't something that I necessarily want to do for the next few years. So I think it's really a two-way street, and about learning, as much about whatever company it is you're talking to as they are about you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Noah. That's a really helpful overview. So folks, if you're scared about networking, that's okay. Do it anyways. It will yield a lot of fruit. And, a lot of folks credit networking as, one of the main reasons why they got the job. So, Noah, moving on, you gave a couple tips for the resume, but as far as resume, cover letter, just kind of application in general, do you have kind of one or two like pro tips or best practices that you feel like helped you in your application?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a pro, but I can tell you what works for me. I think one of the key pieces for me was realizing that you don't have to include everything you've ever done on your resume. I've had kind of a resume since I graduated high school, and at one point there were things I'd done in high school, and another point things I'd done in college, and you really don't need to include everything you've ever done. That resume is less of a background check and more of a marketing tool, if that makes sense. It doesn't need to be a list of everything that's ever happened to you, but rather a way for you to put your best foot forward. And I think when you think about it that way, you have a lot more space to really hone in on the points that you want to make and describe the positions that you held that you think market you best. And you can really cut out some of the fluff, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. I think that'll give peace to a lot of folks, not try to cram a million years of experience onto one page. Or I'll have like a 3-page resume. Don't do 3-page resumes. Firms won't read it. Cool. Well, we've covered networking, we've covered application. I'd love to get into interviews, and this will be fun. But kind of describe, your approach, for full-time recruiting. Like, did you have a structure for case prep, and kind of what did that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So case prep was something that I really focused. I didn't focus on much at all when I was recruiting for internships, and I focused on a lot thereafter recruiting full-time. And I think the case interview was a scary idea to me, because I had a lot of friends that were recruiting for investment banking, which is kind of a parallel sister industry in a lot of ways. And investment banking interviews are very difficult, but there's a lot of memorization, and at least from what I've been told, if you know what to say and you kind of know your information, it's fairly straightforward. But consulting case interviews are very much a process. You can practice all the case interviews in the world, but if you get a question or a prompt that just doesn't align with something that you worked on, it can be difficult to rebound from that and to work through that. So I was definitely a little scared starting out. I tried to prepare as much as I could. I would say what my overall outline looked like was I started with a couple books, Case Interview Secrets, Case in Point, and kind of gave myself a bit of a foundation about how case interviews worked, how the process worked. And then I really just started trying to do as many cases as I possibly could. I had two case partners, one a friend of a friend who was also recruiting, and then a good friend of mine from Virginia. And we would just run cases. I would say we probably ran, cases where they would give me a case, I would give them a case,
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 nights a week, if not more, through pretty much the whole summer. I probably prep for 2 to 3 months. And you kind of, it's definitely a roller coaster, because the more you do it, the more you realize like how little you know. But eventually you get to a point where you're consistently succeeding and you're happy with how it's going. And that kind of aligned with the beginning of my interview process.
Okay. So you really put yourself to it. You weren't going to mess around, and you got serious about kind of the out loud piece of the case prep, not just reading about him, but actually doing them. Yeah, which is super important.
I had an advantage, which was I thought would be a detriment. Ended up being a bit of a blessing in disguise with this process. I tore my ACL at the beginning of last summer, and so I was probably sitting around a lot more than I would have been otherwise, and it gave me a lot of extra time to invest in that kind of preparation.
Wow, yeah, that's rough, but maybe a blessing in disguise. Well, with the case interview, is there a tool or a resource that you credit to as something you would like want to point others to who are starting or in the middle of case prep?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say I have 3. The first would be case books from your college or university. I used the UVA, the Darden case books. I used the Wharton case book, the Duke case book. And these are free case books that are available online that are really great resources to look through, to kind of have consistent cases to go through yourself, go through with a partner. The second would be this podcast, honestly, especially in some of the earlier seasons of the podcast. There's some phenomenal case content. And, if I had time, potentially at the gym or driving, I would turn on, Strategy Simplified and listen through cases. And that just gave me a real sense of, okay, well, this is how people are doing it that, do this for a living, do this professionally. And that's how well this kind of marries up with what I'm doing on my own time. So that was a great resource. And then the third, I think a lot of people, myself included, struggled with structuring, kind of breaking down a problem, framing a problem, more than other aspects. And I think once you kind of spend some time thinking through the structuring process yourself, craftingcases.com has some great structuring resources as well.
Amazing. Okay, that's helpful. 3 practical resources that you can go and find online and start to use. And we'll just say Noah was not paid to say any of that about Strategy Simplified, but we're happy to have you on. Maybe a little bit of a full circle moment there. So you go through the process. Can you walk me through, the call or the email where you found out that you got the job?
Oh, it was a really great moment. I was in my room at school, and the interview process was right in the first week of school for me, which was a little chaotic with classes starting and everything like that. But I'd interviewed that day, and I got the call that night, and one of the happiest moments of my life. It was a real, it was really exciting, put it that way.
Yeah, that's amazing. The smile on your face says it all.
It's a good memory.
Yeah. All right, folks. A good reminder to kind of, keep your eyes on the prize, and it is worth it. It's a lot of work, but it is worth it. Well, Noah, let's imagine you were sitting down with yourself, 2-ish years ago. What's kind of one piece of advice you'd want to give to yourself as far as, the journey that you were about to go on with, trying for summer internships, not getting that, but then kind of coming back around the next year and landing the offer? One piece of advice you'd say to kind of aspiring consultants in that position?
Yeah, I would say, as cliche as it sounds, don't compare yourself to other people. when I was going through the the internship recruiting process, I just started at McIntyre, which is the UVA business school, and McIntyre is a phenomenal environment. It's incredibly collaborative. I had an amazing time there, but everybody's recruiting for similar things. And, as kind of offers come out, you start to see a lot on LinkedIn, and, you're bumping into people in the hall, and especially at a place where there's a lot of really successful people and a lot of people that are succeeding in this recruiting process. If the process is not going as well for you, as it was for me at that point, it was not going particularly well for me at that point at all. I really struggled with comparing myself to other people. It was a difficult time in that way. So I would say just, move at your own pace, handle what you need to handle yourself, and let everything kind of sort out as it will, but really try to avoid that comparison if possible.
I love that. I think that's so important to kind of block out the noise and just focus on what you can control. Well, Noah, we really appreciate you lending your story to Strategy Simplified today. I'm excited to get this out to the good listeners, and thanks for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciated it.